Well, thank you very much, my dear brother Patrick. First and foremost, let me thank you for your tremendous leadership, global leadership on adaptation. I think the Center for Global Center on Adaptation is doing an incredible job getting the world to focus on the world's most vulnerable countries that did not cause the climate change that we all face today. And nowhere is that more important than in Africa. Africa does not contribute for more than 3% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, but it suffers disproportionately from its negative consequences. Think about it. I'm not going to worry you about the figures. The figures are well known, but I want to talk to you about what it means in the lives of people. Take a look at farmers today in Africa. From East Africa, they haven't had rains in 2 years. And that means that pastoralists are losing all of their livestock. That is actually their own savings. That's the assets that they have. It means that women cannot actually feed their kids. It means that you have significant amount of stunting and malnutrition as a result of that. And in fact, in the case of Africa, if you take West Africa, for example, stunting could rise by about almost 43%. You take the case of East Africa, stunting could rise by more than 23%. You take a look at girls that are going to school. One of the critical problems that girls actually have is in rural areas, they got to go and find water. We have girls that are actually walking already 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers to go find water. They are dropping out of school with climate change. We have to think that way. We also have to think about what climate change is doing to displaced populations on our continent. Today we have climate refugees just because there's no water. There's competition for water. And now we have about almost 4.6 million people that are just climate-induced refugees all across the continent, and it can only get worse. And one thing that Professor Vakwejen was talking about is, if you look at Africa, how much we are losing and how much we might lose. Let me put it not in figures, let me just put it this way. We are stressed, we are stressed, we are stressed, but we do not want to be in distress. And that's why this conversation we are having here, it's about that, how to avoid that distress. Together with the Global Center on Adaptation, we have this African Adaptation Acceleration Program that is going to look in how to build climate resilience for infrastructure, for water, for sanitation, for energy, but also looking at how we also bring climate smart agriculture for farmers so that they can actually exist a lot. And this is the largest ever globally effort on adaptation. So it's something, but we need the money. The African Development Bank put down $12.5 billion out of $25 billion. So we're not begging, right? We're saying that we didn't cause the problem. We come to the conversation with very good heart, a very great commitment. Meet us halfway. This is $12.5 billion. Then we need $12.5 billion. And yet the developed countries had promised $100 billion a year. In fact, from Glasgow, that they will double that for adaptation, by 2025. So this is the moment to deliver for Africa. I was just talking to Alok Sharma, the COP26 president, just before coming to this COP conference. And I said, from Glasgow, we have a plane. We had a plane on climate adaptation flying from Glasgow that has to land in Sharm el-Sheikh. When it lands in Sharm el-Sheikh, it must deliver the goods. And the goods it must deliver is financing for Africa. It's totally non-negotiable. Because it's Africa's COP, the needs of Africa must be met. And that's why the leaders are here today. And that's the practicality of what we are talking about. We want to avoid a distress in Africa. Thank you.
Alex.
Okay, everybody, we'll now start to take questions. Again, if you can say your name, media outlet, and who your question is for. We'll start with you in the big dress.
Thank you. This is Anne-Marie Besada with the Africa Report. At the start of the opening of the summit, Senegal's Macky Sall said he had a bitter taste in his mouth from the fact that a lot of the heads of CEOs from industries, like Total, like Shell, for example, but no names were mentioned, were not present. So going forward, we might have commitments from governments, which is fantastic, but how do you expect to meet the goal of actually continuing perpetuating the climate change mitigation, or adaptation rather, if the industry heads aren't even here?
one of the things that we do in Africa very well is if you're playing football, soccer, in South Africa, they have something called a vuvuzela. Whether you like it or not, wherever your house is, whether you're in the stadium or not, present in the stadium or not, you will hear the sound of that vuvuzela. There is a vuvuzela sound that's going from here to leaders that are not here. They will hear it. They will know that Africa's needs are this, and that we do require them to take actions to make sure that those resources are provided for Africa. I also want to say that in terms of private sector, we at the African Development Bank, working with the Global Center on Adaptation, we've put this thing together called the African Financial Alliance for Climate, AFAC, AFAC. The African Alliance for Climate brings together the financial institutions in Africa, from central banks to commercial banks to multilateral financial institutions to the insurance companies, and also brings together the stock exchanges. And the whole idea is, how do we green the financial ecosystem in Africa to be able to get some of the resources? And we think that Africa has today about $2.8 trillion in terms of financing from the pension fund and sovereign wealth funds, and how we are going to actually leverage all of that. So the point I'm making is this: we are not waiting for others. We are taking the decisions we need to take. And I expect that in a world in which we have collective but differentiated responsibility, our partners will eventually join us. But we are not waiting. To the question from Reuters and the adaptation finance, and what are some of the reasons why we are not getting so much on adaptation finance? Well, that's because adaptation is not the problem of developed countries. Developed countries that have to meet net zero think about how they put money into mitigation, to reduce the total amount of emissions. So you do need that. However, here's the issue: why we must focus on adaptation. If you took, for example, since 1850, the total amount of carbon that's in the air that actually been done, is roughly 2,400 gigaton of CO2 that the developed countries have actually put there, which has caused a lot of these problems. Now, the amount available for us in our development going forward now, to be able to maintain the 1.5 degrees, so that we're not going above that for warming, it's only 400 gigatons. The question is this: how do you allocate that 400 gigatons between those that actually caused the problem in the first place, and developing countries such as Africa that actually do need to develop? So in other words, you need more space for development. So the point I'm trying to make is that as we look at adaptation, there must be an equity in terms of the space for development for developing countries to be able to also develop pragmatically. And I'm saying this for one particular case, which is on energy. We still have close to 600 million people in Africa without access to energy. Yes, we are doing everything on renewable energy, from solar to wind to geothermal to hydro. Today at the bank, African Development Bank, 83% of all of our financing for for power generation goes into renewable energy, but we must be realistic. Africa needs natural gas as part of its energy mix. And I hear people sometimes say, well, if you do that, then you're going to be increasing emissions. Guess what? The developed country already used up all its limits. This 400 gigaton that's left has to be allowed the breathing space, the growth space, for Africa to have the energy mix it needs to industrialize and create jobs. So that's the point, just on the mitigation side, to have the space to develop and the kind of energy mix we need. But adaptation is therefore not the big priority of developed countries. But why don't we get enough adaptation finance? First is that to prepare, you have to need funds to prepare the projects for climate adaptation. That's why we are actually, right now with the Global Center on Adaptation, having the African Adaptation Acceleration Program upstream facility to be able to provide the right projects that can be financed. And I want to say that in the last 1 year or so, too, the Global Center on Adaptation's upstream facility has allowed us to mainstream $3 billion of climate finance for adaptation into all of our work. I think that you said the ratio is about 1 to
100.
100. $1 gets you 100 in terms of mainstream that. The other part is incentive for adaptation. And we are now piloting together something called the African Adaptation Benefits Mechanism, wherein philanthropics, banks like us will buy adaptation benefits for projects that are actually delivering climate adaptation. And then we can then sell those things to others so they're able to raise money for climate adaptation. And lastly is that the global finance, climate finance institutions are now prioritizing adaptation as much as they are prioritizing mitigation. Therefore, there's also a need to change the mindset globally that we are suffering in Africa and we want to have a lot more prioritization of global financing going to adaptation. Now, you asked me a question about the African Development Fund 16 replenishment. The African Development Fund 16 replenishment, the African Development Fund, sorry, is the concessional financing arm of the bank that actually basically gives grants, monies to countries to develop. Okay. So when you talk about how to adapt to climate change, we have created a climate action window that essentially we give grants. These are not loans, right? To your question on the loan, it's just grants, you know? Because why should I be borrowing and get into more debt for problems I didn't actually create? What you need are grants, not loans, for countries to adapt to what they didn't cause, right? And so for the climate action window of the bank, African Development Fund, we want to mobilize between $4 billion and $14 billion. Question is, what will it do, right? It will do the following. It will provide 20 million farmers with access to weather index insurance products, including pastoralists. It will take 20 million farmers and also provide them access to climate-resilient agricultural technology, seeds, varieties that are resistant to drought. It will help to regenerate 1 million hectares of degraded land. Most of those will be in the Sahel and all of those areas. It will also provide renewable energy, electricity for about 9.6 million people. And so we are in that replenishment process, and I really will urge all of our developed country partners to finance and fund the African Development Fund 16 replenishment. Of course, we are working very closely with the Global Center on Adaptation. Now, on the issue of the, you asked the tough issue on the leadership and all of that. The reality is that we all need each other to solve this problem. And I think that if there's anything that will come out of here, it's the fact that the Africans actually came to the table here not to beg. We came with resources that countries are committing to climate finance, to climate adaptation, to what the African Development Bank is committed to, what the Global Center on Adaptation is committed to. Right in that room are not small people. You got development finance ministers of Europe, all of them in that room. They are the ones that actually control the pulse of where the money goes. So as much as I really would have really liked to have heads of state in that room, that's a political issue which, at the end of the day, we have to turn the whole issue of promises to commitments. The commitments then have to move into finance. So I am not disappointed by the fact that, you know, we have in that room all the major development finance ministers, and you had them from Norway that were talking to you, had Denmark, you had all of them in terms of their commitment to finance. Everybody, they want to finance the African Adaptation Acceleration Program. They want to finance the ADF replenishment. And so on the practical side, I am pretty happy with what we are getting in terms of support for us. But we also do need our political leaders to talk to themselves. And I'm pretty confident by the time we get to Sharm el-Sheikh there will be that political consensus from Europe, other parts of the world, and African leaders that what we promised, we delivered. And I can't forget what my late mentor, Kofi Annan, used to tell me. He said, Akin, the only promises that matter are the promises that are kept. And so Sharm el-Sheikh is a place where we must keep the promises that have been made on that.
I'm a king, yes, I'm a king, I'm a king,